field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street singing the song and the carrying sign, mostly saying hooray for our side. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. Young people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children, what's that sound? Everybody looks, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. I've got a great show lined up for you today, and it is with 4 Bernie Sanders delegates who were removed by the Sanders campaign. And I want to introduce them right now. We've got next to me, David Bright, who is from the state of Maine. Hi, David.
Hello there.
And below me is Nicole Reid, who is from the state of Michigan. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, thanks for having us.
We have Liano Sharon, who is also from Michigan. How you doing tonight?
Pretty good. Thanks for having us on.
And last but not least is Seth Berner, whose real name is Berner, and he is also from the state of Maine. How you doing, Seth?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing great.
I just wanted to give a little bit of an intro to this show from my perspective before we get into it with the panelists. But I did a show in February. Some of you may have seen the live stream when it happened. About 1,000 people were watching live. And this was in February, a week before the Nevada caucus. We had Christine Kramer and Joe Sacco, who were Bernie Sanders delegates from 2016, who had been shut out by the campaign in 2020, at least regarding staff positions. And we had just gotten wind of the fact that the Bernie Sanders campaign was, this time, unlike last time, actually inviting people to apply to be delegates. And one of the people who were at my house, Jeremy White, who was the head of one of the 3 major Bernie groups in Los Angeles. I headed up Los Angeles for Bernie. He headed up what was called Bernie's Volunteer Office. Later, people may know Bernie's Coffee Shop. And then Carlos Marroquin from the Bernie Sanders Brigade. So Jeremy worked with Michelle Manos, and all of us were blacklisted by the campaign in 2020, which was really sad because I'm wearing, as you can see, this shirt, Enough is Enough. And I'll talk more about that in a little while. And I'm wearing my Bernie earrings. I don't know if you can see this. For a solid year, I wore nothing but one of my 15 Bernie t-shirts and did so much for that man. And also, even at the convention, organized the TPP protest that many of you may have participated in. But I exited in 2017. I had started my show at the beginning of that year and really didn't organize for him in 2020. But I was covering what my friends, Bernie activists in Los Angeles, were doing. I was covering all of Bernie's rallies. So obviously, having exited, I was not going to apply to be a delegate. But I saw that, sure enough, in May, many of the activists who were former delegates and also really strong volunteers this time, maybe they weren't delegates, but they were volunteers, got rejected by the campaign. And it was very hurtful. I took it off the same day because I didn't want to hurt the Bernie Sanders campaign, because we know how the mainstream media loves to get a hold of any internal negativity in the Bernie campaign and use it against him. So I certainly didn't want to add to that. But after it happened in May that we were proved right, I really felt like I couldn't keep silent any longer. So I cut a shorter video from that live stream in which we talked about this. I want to give each of you an opportunity to first talk about your involvement with the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016 at the convention, and also what you did in 2020, just leading up to the point at which you applied to be delegates and before you were removed. And we'll start with you, David.
Okay, in 2016, we had a caucus system, not a primary system. And so it was imperative to get as many people to the caucus as possible so you could get as many state delegates as possible. but it was the state delegates who actually showed up at the state convention that set the ratio of our delegates. I'd had a lot of experience in organizing caucuses. We didn't get a lot of support, factory support from the Sanders campaign. The biggest thing was that year you were allowed to absentee ballot for the caucus. And we tried to get the campaign to basically spend a little money and send a note to everybody they had, donors and volunteers and all that, encourage them to absentee, because that way they wouldn't have to hang around the caucus and all that. They didn't want to do that, so they didn't do it, and they weren't interested in it until Clinton did it. By then it was too late. But be that as it may, we came away from the state convention with about 67%, about 2/3 Bernie over Clinton. So we were feeling pretty good. We did have one fight with national because our delegation was gender balanced. The Clinton delegation was not. They had too many women because they needed to get the Attorney General, who's now our governor, into that delegation. So they told the state party told us, well, okay, we're going to just take one of your women out and replace her with a man. And that way we got out of balance, and the Clinton people would be out of balance, but the entire delegation would be in balance. And Seth and I said, no, we're not going to do that. And Seth did his magic thing and filed a challenge and all that. We took it all the way to the Credentials Committee, and we won that. And so the Bernie delegation was back in, and they at that point the DNC had to say, well, I guess we got to let the delegation be off center. So just because they didn't want to deal with the Clinton folks. So that happened, and then of course along came New Hampshire when Bernie caved, and there was that awful meeting in New Hampshire when Clinton was, he endorsed Clinton, and he gave this little speech and all that. In order to get a bunch of Maine people there, they promised us, well, we'd be able to at least get together as a group photo with Bernie. And so the head of the Maine Democratic Party said, yeah, come on over to New Hampshire. And a bunch of us went over there. And we got put in this room, and we're off in the corner, and there's all these Clinton people in the other corners. And they've got the lights set up to do the photos. And then he comes in and tells us, oh, I guess I made a mistake. Bernie won't be doing photos. And a week later, that guy was working he left the Maine Democratic Party and was working for the Clinton campaign. I think we did a good job in Philadelphia. Everybody hung tough. We cast our votes for Bernie. And I must confess that after Tuesday night, I hopped on a train and came back to Maine because I had a farm to run and my wife was here all alone. So I didn't get to stay with all of the fun stuff you had, but we hung in there as best we could. And at that point, after the ballots were cast, I figured my work was done. So I left.
To pick up where he left off, Seth, and maybe you can talk about what you guys did in the 2020 campaign. Talk more about the convention, because I mentioned that I would talk about this shirt, which it says enough is enough. This was something that was planned. I forget who organized this, but we did it through our national delegates page, and we all ordered these shirts, and they happen to glow in the dark. And I don't know if whoever came up with this idea was anticipating this or not, but one of the benefits was when they turned off the lights on the Oregon delegation, because they were protesting no more war, you could still see the Bernie shirts because they glowed in the dark. So we were able to thwart them with that. Yeah, then there was the walkout where people walked out, then they went to the media tent and all this stuff. And I'm just convinced that this is exactly what they didn't want to have happen this time. But we can talk more about the reasons. But first, I want to get back to your involvement in the campaign, just setting the scene to show folks how involved and how loyal you guys were. So Seth, carry on.
Sure. So I also worked very hard on the Bernie Sanders campaign in Maine in 2016 and was rewarded by my community by being elected a national delegate. And David told you some of what we went through, having to file a formal challenge with the Democratic National Committee because the Maine Democratic Party was playing games with our delegation. We won, which was completely unprecedented. David and I are very proud of that. And after David left, our delegation chair was the head of the Maine Democratic Party, which kind of got forced on us without an opportunity to challenge that appointment. And he spent the week threatening to send the Sanders people home because we were not as compliant with Hillary Clinton as he wanted us to be. And as David said, Sanders had about 70% of the Maine delegates, but the chair was a Clinton supporter. He threatened to send us home, and that kind of represented the week. Speaking for myself, the last night when Clinton gave her speech, I was not in the auditorium because I had given my credentials to Code Pink so that they would have a presence in the auditorium. And I absolutely supported the message that they delivered more than the message that Ms. Clinton delivered. And then when Sanders announced that he was running again, I started working again. And I'm one of those people who likes reading rules. So when the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, announced that because Sanders had suspended his campaign, they were free to take away his delegates. And, well, no, he had suspended his campaign, but he was still very much a candidate. They were basically saying that if I leave my wife, I'm divorced. Well, no, I'm not divorced until I go through all the steps and dot the I's and cross the T's. And Bernie Sanders had not done that. So we filed an official challenge with the DNC. And apparently that was enough to get us kicked off because, as far as I can tell, David and I were the only people in the country to formally challenge this interpretation that the DNC was forcing on everyone. We were not going to let it go.
I don't want to discuss the removal yet.
What I was doing in 2020 was training people for the caucus, training people for the primary, helping to cut turf, making phone calls, trying to bring people into working on the Sanders campaign. I had previously been a member of the Green Party and had friends who were not Democrats, and I was trying to convince them that this was a campaign worth working on. So I was one of the more active, unpaid people trying to advance Bernie Sanders' campaign in Maine in 2020.
All right, great. Now let's get on to Michigan, and we'll start with you, Nicole. Tell us what you did in 2016 and 2020 for the Bernie Sanders campaign.
In 2016, I was a volunteer for Bernie, and he inspired me to run for office. So I was running for state rep, and my primary was the week after the convention. So I did not go as a delegate in 2016. But I stayed active with all of our Michigan progressives over the past 4 years. And early last spring, when there was rumors that Bernie was considering running, I started organizing in Port Huron, which is where I'm from and where I live now. I lived near Detroit in 2016, so I worked with the Detroit group then. So I started hosting, I believe last April, monthly meetings or St. Clair County for Bernie Sanders. And we went to multiple rallies, we organized, we made buttons. We basically organized the whole county. We spent a lot of time knocking doors. We had a barnstorm here that had, I believe we had 68 people. And I live in a very red county, so that was huge here. And we had a whole bunch of volunteers open up their homes and do the door-to-door canvassing. So that would be my involvement, would be as the founder of St. Clair County for Bernie Sanders.
Now let's go to you, Liano.
Hi. Yeah. So in 2016, I was I primarily did a lot of phone banking, but I wasn't a member of the Democratic Party until December 5th, when I read an article about a large group of people actually going in and challenging the establishment of the party directly. And I said that, if that's what's going on, that hasn't happened in a long time around here, and I'm in. So I joined the party. We organized a whole package of rules reforms that we tried to push through all the county and district conventions and up to the state convention. And we got a bunch of that stuff through. And since then I've been organizing the whole time. I'm on the state central committee and I'm on the rules committee. And I've been this is my second term on both of those. We're doing a lot of stuff. I'll get into some of that later, I suppose. What I did this year, I've been phone banking. I've been writing articles. I've been working on organizing, basically, for the long term, not just for the short term, because I want to go and I want to take the party farther left.
Before we talk about this process of removal and how you guys are fighting back, I want to do my best Barbara Walters or, The View, and ask you, how does this make you feel? Because I know I generally try to think about things on an intellectual basis, on an issues basis. But when it comes down to it, we're all a bunch of human beings that have feelings. And I know how it felt when I was trying to advise the Bernie Sanders campaign during 2016, and nothing was returned, and I found out certain people did not think highly of me, no matter how hard I worked, and it hurt on a personal level. And that's one of the reasons I didn't organize for him this time. That and the fact that I had exited, I was doing my show. I was planning to, if the coronavirus didn't hit, I was planning to go cover the convention, as a journalist. But I really feel like, there's only so many times you can be slapped in the face and be beaten down before you just finally say, okay, obviously they don't value my contribution. There's only so much you can do for the cause. There's going to be other ways I can contribute to the cause. And I do. I'm still an activist and organizer on the issues. But I want to just kind of go through how you felt on a personal level. And let's start with you, David, because you spoke first last time.
Well, yeah, the thing I discovered quickly in 2016 is that it was definitely a one-way campaign. They would tell you something, email that always came from info at, if you went to their website, there was no human beings that you could reach on that website. The only phone number there was some number for the media to call. And we quickly discovered that whoever was at the top had little use for people in the States. They apparently they thought they knew how to run a campaign in all 56 jurisdictions, and that's what they were going to do. So we basically had no factory support. Yeah, we got signs and bumper stickers and buttons, but when we wanted to do something creative, I mean, to think that you wanted to send an email out to your people in one congressional district, and you had to call Burlington and get somebody to approve the email, and 4 days later it went out. I mean, that just doesn't work. And it was actually worse this time around. We had basically one person in Maine that they hired, who was a great guy, and did the best he could, but he, we'd make suggestions and he'd send it upstairs, and that was all of it. They didn't really understand our process. They certainly didn't understand the caucus process, and made a lot of mistakes on the state convention that we had to correct on the ground. Just basically, we went into black ops mode. We stopped asking. We just did stuff, and that's how we got that 67%. This time around, it was the same kind of thing, but we got even less support. As an example, we had an election in November. And our presidential primary was in June. In March. And so I said, well, geez, we needed to get 2,000 signatures to get Bernie on the ballot because it was now a primary run by the state. And so I said, well, let's put tables in at the November election, because we're not on that ballot, so we can certainly go in there and collect signatures. And at the last minute, the Sanders people decided they liked the idea, and they sent a couple people in to do that. In the meantime, I had already gone to the Secretary of State and secured 1,000 nomination papers, and then I got told that, no, throw them out because the the campaign says that they're not any good. You know, we got behind, and a week later they came in to the Secretary of State and had to make another set of papers, and they were exactly the same thing. But we had a meeting, and they started passing out the nomination papers, and I wrote some stuff as to how it would work and all that. And I brought the 1,000 papers that I had, and they were very happy because they didn't think they were going to have enough. They didn't have a sense of how to work in a state.
All right. Well, I share your concerns with that. We had this problem in California, and I could go over all my grievances. And I'll also tell you that people were contacting me from other states, Rhode Island, North Carolina, Massachusetts, what have you, because I started LA for Bernie very early. It was in May of 2015. So there were a lot of super volunteers that started that early, and we were all in communication with one another, kind of sharing these war stories. Yeah, I mean, in California, we pretty much had a mutiny because the people that they hired were not, in 2020, were not even Berners, most of them. And they were, I mean, we could talk about Chuck Rocha and what he was trying to do with his own personal career. He and Jeff Weaver obviously left as soon as possible to start this super PAC for Biden. And Bernie was not happy about it. So they're now getting beyond Bernie and doing their own thing, sort of revealing their true colors. But, you know, people like, I think me and all of you guys and the people watching supported Bernie because of the issues and because of not me, us. And when it comes down to it, the only thing they wanted us to do was phone bank, canvas, and text, you know. But if anybody should have some strategic ideas about how they should organize in their community, suggestions for people who should be on the stage with Bernie or places where he should campaign, or even different strategies, like many of my strategies that I had suggested, such as a low-income outreach program and constituency outreach, they sort of ignored me at the time in 2016, but then I was pleased to find that they had incorporated them in their 2020 campaign. But I guess what I'm still trying to get from you guys is, how does it make you feel when you devote your life, you know, and it was your life for a period of time, to somebody, you're not being paid, you know, contrary to these other people who are sort of mercenaries. They go from campaign to campaign, and because it's about the issues. Do you feel like Bernie Sanders himself let you down? Is what I'm trying to get at. Maybe we'll go to you, Nicole.
Oh, I have so many emotions. So my initial reaction the first time I got rejected was anger and hurt. And I was ashamed of myself because I forgot to mention that I was a Bernie victory captain too. And I had been telling our group for months, like, hey, we need to organize. We need to go to this convention May 16th. I'm going to run and I'm going to win and I'm going to be your delegate. And then the campaign told me, no, like, we don't want you to be your delegate. And then I realized that they had broken their own rules and contacted them, and they agreed to fix it and put me back on, and it got my hopes up. And then they rejected me again. And at that point, I was shocked, speechless. I just numb. Liano talked to me that night. I reached out to one of our other really active progressives, Sam Pernick, and he reached out to Liano, and that was what prompted the article that Liano wrote. But it did hurt on an emotional level. The last month of the campaign, I was working full-time and campaigning full-time, and I barely saw my children. So then it went back to anger, and I felt defeated. I took down all my Bernie signs. This is honestly the first time I've put on a Bernie t-shirt since then. So do I feel like Bernie let me down? Yeah, I do. I mean, he's done so many amazing things in his political career, but why doesn't he want real progressives representing him?
You know, I'm not sure that Bernie knows all of this. The way it looked to me like there was this core of high-priced, follow the money kind of people in there. And I'd like to think that Bernie was off in a little bubble someplace doing what he does, and that he didn't have a real sense of this. But maybe I'm wrong, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Well, we got the impression here in California that it was Bernie activists who got hired onto staff, and some of them did get accepted to be delegates, and some of them didn't. And the ones that were accepted and the ones that weren't were activists, but it was more like who got along with these paid staffers. And if they didn't alienate themselves on a personal level from the paid staffer, then they would get, recommended for delegate. But that seemed to be like a first level. I'm getting that there was a second level that this Matt Berg was involved in, and maybe we can talk about him a little bit more. That had to do with your Aunt Never Biden posts. Like once you were recommended by the local staff, then somebody started looking at your social media pages. And then we determined that even people who got along with this campaign staff were not accepted. And I'm just going by California now, because they were virulently anti-Biden. And the whole thing is that we've gotten the impression ever since Bernie, at least I got the impression, ever since Bernie did not take on Biden as strongly as he could have, because he kept saying, my friend Joe Biden, that he really is friends with Joe Biden. And Bernie is human too. And he, Joe Biden was one of the few people that was nice to him in that whole Senate for all these years. And it was harder, I think, for him to take on Biden than it was for him to take on Hillary. And for me, when he blew that last debate, when Biden was on, I don't know what drug they gave him, but he was not making gaffes. He was being articulate. He was being coherent. Bernie blew it, I thought, because he asked him, this is the example I always use from that debate. He said, Joe, didn't you say that you were going to cut Social Security or something like that? And Biden lies. He says, no, I never said that. Now, Biden has a history of lying. He has a history of plagiarizing. Did Bernie really think that he was going to admit to saying that on the debate stage? So what I would have done if I was advising Bernie, Bernie should come with a piece of paper. Like lawyers, they never ask the first question. They always ask the second question. They don't say, did you say this? You say, why did you say on April 29th, 1995, and I quote, I will cut Social Security once, I will cut it twice, and I will cut it again on the floor of the Senate. Now, if he had said it to him that way, it would have been very hard for Joe to wiggle out of it, because here clearly Bernie was reading from a transcript. And we know that the mainstream media is never going to check Biden because they're working for him, essentially. So what does Bernie do? He gets flustered and he turns to the viewers and he says, well, you can go to the YouTube and Google it or something like that. In other words, giving the viewers homework. Bernie should not have done that. And then the next thing is he goes on Jimmy Fallon. And when Jimmy Fallon asks him, do you think Joe Biden could beat Trump? Bernie says, yes. I mean, essentially giving people permission to vote for Joe Biden. So it became very clear to me that Bernie was not going to do what he needed to do. Also, the main mistake was not having a ground game after California, because the only way to counteract the mainstream media smears was at the doors. In other words, we won California because we had 100 field organizers and all the volunteers they were supervising going door to door and telling the story of Bernie to people on a one-to-one level. Chuck Rocha, for all his, he's so good with Texas, which is where he comes from, they didn't even have a ground game in Texas, and Bernie lost. So, and then Bernie endorses this guy without even getting any concessions, just 6 meaningless task forces. It was just so disappointing. And you have to wonder, did really Bernie want to win? Is it just that he's old? Is it just that he's been in that institution of the Senate for 30 years, that he has become the very establishment that he reviled? I mean, Bernie in 1980s, if you listen to him in the 80s, he's a completely different guy than he is now. So, I mean, that's sort of my analysis. And as far as what Bernie knew, I don't think he knew of these specific instances. I don't think he knows about any of us personally, even though I've met him, 5 times. But the fact is, the buck stops here. He's the head of the campaign and he ultimately has to be responsible for who he's hired. We do know that we're Berners and we do fight back. And that's what I want to get into now. So I want to pick up with Seth where you left off, because you guys know the rules. You've been in your party for a long time. What exactly did you then do?
So when the Democratic National Committee said that Bernie had withdrawn, and therefore, under the National Democrat delegate selection rules, which is like reading the tax code, the party leader and elected officials and at-large delegates were forfeited and would go to remaining candidates, which just conveniently happened to be Joe Biden and nobody else. The problem is, as I was saying before, is Bernie hadn't withdrawn. Bernie had suspended, but that's not a word that appears anywhere in any of the national Democratic rules or any of the state rules. And so they just sort of waved a magic wand and said, suspension is withdrawn. And David and I tried to discuss with the Maine Democratic Party, which stated its intention to enforce the DNC's wish list. And they said, no, we're going to do this. And so David and I, we got the signatures of 62 delegates to the state convention. We only needed 15. And we collected these during the COVID when we couldn't go door to door. People were calling us asking, how can we sign?
You're looking up and you're getting glare on your glasses.
How about if I take my glasses off?
Okay.
So we got the signatures of like 4 times as many people as we needed, filed the formal challenge with the Bylaws and Rules Committee of the Democratic National Committee. It's been served on them. It's been served on the Maine Democratic Party. The Maine Democratic Party has a certain time period in which to answer. And they're coming up on that, and they haven't answered yet. I'm guessing that the DNC thinks that because we're no longer national delegates, we don't have a right to pursue this. But that's not true, because we're still state delegates, and we still have the right to vote for Sanders delegates who will remain Sanders delegates. We don't want to vote for Sanders delegates who are going to be turned into Biden delegates. So our challenge is still alive. It's not going anywhere. I don't know that it's possible to make us angrier, but certainly what the Sanders campaign and the DNC did certainly didn't make me want to sing Kumbaya.
Liano, you wrote what was sent to me, and I want to thank Michael Keenan for sending it to me, because otherwise I never would have seen it. Your extremely creative challenge based on creed. Can you please explain how you challenged, and you weren't challenging for yourself, you were challenging for Nicole,
Correct.
For removal?
Sure. Well, the Democratic Party rules, like in a number of places, like 5 or 6 places at least, say that there's this thing called status. And status is things like race and ethnicity and class and all that kind of stuff. And it includes creed. And a creed is a fundamental set of beliefs. Well, the reason that they gave, and Matt Berg actually wrote a letter, an email that's attached to the piece I posted, that includes this. So he told us exactly why he had let Nicole go, or struck her name, and the reason was that he didn't think that she was a true Democrat. I mean, that's essentially what it was. Rule 13H. You can look it up. There's some stuff in there about not being a true Democrat, not having the best interests of the Democratic Party at heart, all that kind of stuff. And my argument is that, number one, the delegates that are being elected to represent the people that supported Bernie in their district. They're not being elected to support Bernie Sanders. They're being elected to support him by people, and they represent those people. They don't represent the campaign. And for the campaign to say that that because of somebody's deeply held beliefs, for example, that she doesn't want to vote for an accused rapist, credibly accused, that she doesn't want to vote for the lesser of two evils. Those are 2 things that are fundamental beliefs. These are 2 things that are fundamental beliefs that are clearly part of her creed that she believes in. And to remove her on that basis it's just against the rules. There's just no question about it. There's literally a rule 5B in the delegate selection rules that says that discrimination based on status is forbidden. That's or prohibited, I think. I'm sorry. You know, I mean, it's literally, that's the rule. It's one sentence. I don't know how much clearer you can get that it's just not, it's just illegal. Now, the other thing that I pointed out is that there's a difference between the Democratic Party and the leadership of the Democratic Party. We're talking about electing delegates to represent members from a district at a convention. They are striking delegates because they don't like the things that she's saying about leadership. The party isn't the leadership. The leadership is separate from the party. And people in the party have the right to challenge leadership. Okay, we have the absolute right to challenge leadership any way we want, okay, anywhere we want, anyhow we want. We have that right to do that. What the Sanders campaign was saying, they were not going to allow anybody who would pose any challenge to the establishment at all. And the campaign was determining that, not the people in the district who actually get to vote. And in this case, in Nicole's case, there's actually a rule that says that they have to approve. They are required to approve 3 times the number of candidates as there are delegate positions in that space. There was one delegate position, and there were 3 candidates that applied, Nicole and 2 others. They broke the rules to take Nicole off the list. That's how strongly they're opposed to challenging the establishment.
So where does it stand now with both of your guys' challenges within your party, since you're so knowledgeable about the rules? So they have to answer you, right? I mean, you don't imagine they're just going to ignore it. And if they do answer you, what do you think, what are you anticipating the answer will be, or the next steps will be?
I don't know. I mean, so far, we've gotten no response. There's just been nothing. It's unclear exactly where you challenge this. Is this a state level thing that you go through the state rules committee, or do you go to the national rules committee? So we're exploring what's going on, and we're going to find out. But so far they've told us nothing. And you know, those rules, by the way, one of the great things that we did in Michigan is that we forced them to abolish all of the prior rulings of the appeals committee. They removed them as precedent. So they can't use that stuff anymore, where they're literally, it's up is down, black is white kind of things.
And what do you guys in Maine think is going to happen with yours?
It's credit, the Maine Democratic Party didn't want to have anything to do with it. They said, this isn't us. And they punted it right off. They could have sat on it for a while, but they said, look, we're going to deny this to give you time to go to the DNC. And that's where we are. Once they said, no, we're not going to do it, we had 10 days to get something to the DNC, which involved our work getting 61 signatures through the mail, because that's the only way we can get them.
You should get your rules committee to allow you to take signatures like that over the internet, which we did that.
This is happening all over the country. I mean, just yesterday, the Oregon delegates received their letters. And I know that a lot of the activists that I personally met, either in Philadelphia or when I visited Portland, were removed. And they're just kind of processing this now. I invited any of them who wanted to be on the show to come on the show, but I think they may be, it's like the stages of grief. You know, first there's denial, and then there's anger. I think they may be in denial now, because one person posted something that said, oh no, it's just a formality. They were not approved because they didn't fill out the questionnaire properly, you know, kind of giving the candidate the benefit, or the campaign the benefit of the doubt. Who wants to talk about this guy, Matt Berg? Because he obviously, where the buck stops before it gets to Bernie, the buck stops with him. What do we know about this guy?
I ran into him in 2016, Lauren, when I filed a formal challenge then, because as David explained, the Maine Democratic Party was playing musical chairs with the delegation. It was an absolute clear violation of the rules, the national rules, and we filed a challenge to protect the Sanders delegates. And Matt Berg in 2016 told me not to proceed with our challenge. He was supposedly representing the Sanders campaign. We were trying to represent Sanders delegates, but he told us to go away. We ended up winning. So I came out of 2016 with a picture of Matt Berg, though I didn't know his whole life story. And then we ran into him again with this challenge. He had been involved in getting Tom Perez the chairmanship of the Democratic National Committee when Bernie was supporting Keith Ellison. Matt Berg has switched from candidate to candidate. When he was done supposedly working with Bernie Sanders in 2016, he started working for Hillary Clinton. And my impression of him is that his first loyalty is to the DNC. His loyalty is not to Sanders. His loyalty is not to the Sanders movement. His loyalty is to whatever will make the Democratic National Committee the happiest. And though he signs things as Sanders' delegation team, I think that he's not really working for Bernie Sanders.
The other thing about that is when we got our letters, our emails that said, by the way, thanks for applying, but we've taken you off the list. They didn't even have the courage to sign it.
Right.
Signed by the Bernie delegate team. He didn't even have the courage to put his name on it.
So do you guys get the impression that what they're trying to do is make sure that everything goes smoothly for Joe Biden, and that if any of us, well, I'm not a Democrat anymore, but any of you guys, if you were to go and you were going to see untoward things happening, you might not go along. Like if Bernie Sanders has decided to go along to get along for whatever reason, it's not a given that he can get his movement to do it. That part of not me, us is true.
Right.
And I mean, I just find this whole thing, ironic because he talks about a political revolution, which he's always qualified. He's never talked about a revolution, which is what we need. We need to overthrow capitalism in this country. But a political revolution, he's trying to essentially reform the Democratic Party. And by very definition, reform is not revolution. So to me, this is a very sad end to something that started out as a political revolution. What kinds of things do you think he was worried about could happen if this became a virtual convention? Obviously, if it's a virtual convention, you can't really do the kind of protesting that we did both inside and outside in 2016. I mean, you could maybe Zoom bomb it. I don't know. But what kinds of things do you think they're trying to prevent by denying people like yourselves delegate positions?
Criticism of Biden and anything that would make them look bad. It seems silly to me. This is going to make them look bad. This is going to make them look bad, especially to his supporters, to his strongest supporters. I don't have a full list, but of the people that got stricken from the lists are the people that are the most visible anti-establishment people, the people that are challenging the establishment, who are standing up and saying, no, this isn't right. No, we've got to follow the rules. No, we've got to do these things the right way. And those are the people that are getting kicked off, which tells me that he's basically capitulated to whatever they want. He's gonna let them do whatever they want with the rules. He's not gonna have anybody there that's going to push that hard. Well, that's not quite true, because there's some people I know that are still going to be there. But so that made it through and actually became delegates because they're not as visibly anti-establishment as some of us are. They're trying to make a media event that they can control rather than something that they maybe can't control, like 68 or 2016.
I think that Bernie is so focused on beating Trump at this point that he's blinded by how corrupt and awful Biden is. And at some level, he realizes that he wants the supporters, his delegates, to fall in line. And like Liano said, a lot of the people that were stricken are people that won't do that. So I think that he's just blinded by this hatred for Trump.
I always tell people that, Trump is just a symptom of the disease, and the disease is neoliberal capitalism. And I've got a lot of friends, Bernie supporters, staunch progressives, who say it's qualitatively different. We've got to get rid of Trump. I don't care if he raped Tara Reid. They're literally saying that. I don't care if he's senile, a trained monkey would be better than Donald Trump. And I just think that is such mistaken thinking, because what's going to happen is if we don't treat the disease, it's like a cancer. It's going to continue to metastasize. Situations for people, for working people, are going to get worse and worse. And then next, Biden's not going to improve anything for anyone. These horrible things are going to continue. And because what happens is when you have a Democrat doing these things, like look at Bill Clinton, look at Barack Obama, they were able to do things that Republicans only dreamed of, but could never have gotten established because of Democratic opposition. So Bill Clinton was the one who did mass incarceration. He was the one that did NAFTA and outsourced all the jobs. He was the one that deregulated the media, that deregulated the banks, that reformed welfare and put so many people into poverty. You know, that all happened under this Democrat. And the same thing with Barack Obama. So my friends who say we just have to bite the bullet and vote for Biden, he's not my first choice, he's not my 10th choice, he's not my 20th choice, but we'll just hold him accountable. And I say, I've never seen anybody hold these people accountable. I've been hearing it for 40 years, but nobody actually does it. The time to hold them accountable is before you vote for them, you know, or in the case of Bernie Sanders, before you endorse them. You don't just endorse them for 6 meaningless task forces. He could have gotten, you know, 1, 2, maybe even 3 of his programs passed if he had used his leverage at the time that he had it. Let me ask you one more question, everybody, because a lot of people are still thinking that they're going to influence the Democratic Party. I know people dem-exited like myself in 2016. I see new people dem-exiting now. People are going towards the Green Party. People are going towards Movement for a People's Party, Nick Brana's group. How many of you still plan to stay in the Democratic Party and try to reform it? And how many of you are thinking of dem-exiting as a result of this experience?
Lauren, I'm running as a candidate for national committee person. And I'm doing that because I want to bring some transparency and some ethics to the DNC. And I want them to stop laundering money, and I want them to stop supporting candidates before the primary, and a number of reasons. And we also have a terrific candidate running for U.S. Senate against Susan Collins here, who is one being ignored by the Democratic Party. Her name is Betsy Sweet, but I'm certainly going to hang in there and do what I can to get Betsy the nomination and then get her elected. If I don't become a DNC person, well, you know, we'll just see what happens after the Maine primary. I'm also running for elector again. I was an elector in 2016, and I tried to cast a vote for Bernie. Couldn't do it because of the state law, but it did result in a friend in Hawaii actually casting a vote, and it counted. So, you know, so I'm one of the one of 2 people in the world who actually managed to get Bernie Sanders a vote that's in the National Archives from 2016. But I'm still under the bus. So my goal, I think, is, you know, as long as I'm going to be hanging under the bus, I'm going to see if I can, you know, at least start wiggling the transmission and see if I can get it headed in another direction.
I'm probably going to run for DNC as well. That's coming up. I've got a couple of other things I've got to look into, but I think I'm probably going to do that. The key thing here in Michigan is that we're a little bit unique in that anybody 16 years of age and older can join the party and 30 days later gets the same vote as anybody else. Anybody in Michigan. And despite this, the party can't seem to hang on to more than about 10,000 members. And about maybe a quarter of those show up at state conventions that progressives aren't organizing for. We organized for the conventions that we organized for, we brought it up to 4,700 and 6,700. We've got a group around the state that's organized, not just one group, a bunch of groups around the state that are organizing people, and I think we have a very good chance of making much more headway coming up in 2021. I want to talk to like leftists and progressives and people like that, whatever they're doing, Green Party folks, People's Movement folks. There's nothing that stops you from being involved in that, and also joining the Michigan Democratic Party. and show up once a year. Show up in odd numbered years to the state convention to help elect progressives to state party positions. Show up at the and in the off years like this year. Show up to vote for the delegates for president at the district conventions.
All right, we're gonna have to wrap it up. So I want to have your last words, Nicole and Seth.
So I was on state central committee for 2 years, and they despised us. I mean, Liano's still on it. They literally would sit in front of us and talk about how obnoxious we were because we dared to ask questions during a 2-hour meeting 4 times a year that they ran to be elected to. No one made them do this. In March, I was speaking about Bernie at a local Dems meeting, and this old man sitting on the panel next to me is pounding on the table, screaming at me, "Why isn't Bernie a big D Democrat?" So my relationship with the Democrats is abusive, and I'm done. I will show up once a year if Liano wants me to, go to the convention and vote for progressives. I will obviously campaign and vote for local progressives, but I was already on one Zoom call for the movement for a People's Party, and I'm going to continue exploring my third party options and place my energy somewhere where it will be valued.
And finally, you, Seth.
So I've been on the Maine Democratic State Committee for 2 terms. I've been almost completely isolated and ostracized because I dare to talk about change. I'm running for a 3rd term, and I'll see what the committee looks like. If I have support, I'll probably stay with it. But for me, it's a real quandary because to make change through electoral politics takes a certain amount of resources. The reality is that the Democratic Party has those resources. If we can get a hold of those resources, we have a chance. And it might be possible for the state of Maine, even if it's not possible nationally. If I leave the Democratic Party, there's no end of work on the streets that can be done. There's no end of organizing that can be done. But electorally, I don't know how we accomplish much of anything above a municipal level outside of one of the big parties. So it's very much a quandary for me. I'm with Nicole. I find it an abusive situation. And yet I'm not sure what the viable alternatives are.
Well, there's always organizing on the issues, and I'll let people know that Christine Kramer, who I mentioned was on my show in February, has organized a Medicare for All PAC. And she's got a list of all 2,000 delegates, and she's going to be contacting them to see how committed they are to voting for Medicare for All in the platform committee. So there are opportunities at that convention, I think, within the platform committee and the rules committee. And I know that my California people didn't want to be on this show tonight because they are still trying to influence the process, specifically the superdelegate thing. They said that's not a permanent thing. It was a temporary thing. They want to make sure it gets permanent. I mean, I'm with Jill Stein, though. I don't think you can have a revolution in a counter-revolutionary party. And I'm very happy to have Dem exited and gone back to my work on the issues. And although I do think that we need to have an inside-outside strategy, and I was talking about that on my show with Pramila Jayapal yesterday, how we can best support her. Progressive, she's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, how when they're working on things, whether it's trying to make these big stimulus bills more progressive or trying to get individual bills passed, how we can better coordinate on the outside. So that's something that I'm going to continue to pursue because I think everything needs more coordination. So I want to thank all of you guys for being on the show, and I want to wish you luck in your future endeavors. And before I go, I want to let people know that on my next show, I'm going to have a man by the name of Graham Steele, who wrote an article in The Hill today that I happened to read about the Federal Reserve. I had asked Pramila Jayapal about the Federal Reserve yesterday. She sort of didn't answer the question. I don't think she was prepared for it because I didn't tell her communications director that I'd be asking about this. I only got the idea for the question yesterday when I read David Dayen's column about how the Federal Reserve really did the $10 trillion that all the corporations and the private equity companies and the hedge funds and the banks got a hold of. they did that through monetary policy, and they were able to bypass the bailouts. For example, Boeing and some of the airlines didn't even take that bailout money because it came with conditions, like they had to keep their workers on the payroll. The Fed enabled them to get the money through the capital markets by backstopping all of these corporate bonds. They said they're going to buy every corporate bond, even junk bonds. So companies that were highly insolvent and risky, the Fed is backing them. And that's probably because I read another blog that I get every day called Wall Street on Parade by former Wall Street people, that the chairman, Jerome Powell, and his vice chairman, Raymond Quarles, used to work for the Carlyle Group, which is a major private equity group. So this is how it works. This is one big club, and we ain't in it, people. So the guy who wrote this article that I read today about the Fed is named Graham Steele, and he works for Stanford Business School. He runs a center there, but he used to be the chief counsel for the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. And before that, he was legislative assistant for Sherrod Brown, handling his work as a member of the Banking Committee. He also spent 4 years as the staff director of the Subcommittee on Financial Institutions and Consumer Protection. And before that, he was a policy counsel at Public Citizens Congress Watch. So he's extremely knowledgeable and experienced. And I want to get to the bottom of this issue with the Federal Reserve. You guys may remember that Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul got the only audit of the Fed, and it revealed a lot. Now, this is essentially, it should be our public bank. I'm also very active in the public banking movement. This should be our public bank, but it's not. It's really run by bankers for bankers, and it's not in our interest. So hopefully I'll get them on Sunday night, my usual time, which is now 6 p.m. I want to thank you guys. Stay home, stay safe, and keep fighting.